All right, guys. Let's see if I can get that off of there. Looks like I'm going to have a little bit of a halo, or at least some lines there on my face from my light here in this office. Um, this is the first video of the last section, so you should have already by now. You've taken exam 2. You have seen that I posted on Blackboard and through email the group facility and group programming requirements and group numbers and group groupings. Okay, so if all the people with ones, y'all are a group, twos, threes, fours, and fives. So I would suggest just doing Google Docs and stuff like that for those. And then if you have any questions, email me. Okay. Um, but let's start this. This one's going to be a pretty good, quick chapter. All the information here is good information. There's nothing that I'm necessarily skipping over. I just think that there's some stuff that you can read through the PowerPoint to obtain, to where other stuff is a little bit more real life scenario kind of things that we're going to talk about. And that's going to be kind of how I would have handled the chapter had we been meeting in person like we would typically on a regular semester day without all this online and at home stuff. Okay. So chapter 12 is principles of test selection and administration. Basically, this chapter is going to talk about why we would choose certain tests that we would do, how to choose the test, and how to administer the test properly so that we obtain things in the manner that we want to obtain them and the information that we obtain is usable. Okay? So we're going to identify and explain the reasons for performing the exams, understand testing terminology, evaluate a test validity and reliability, select appropriate tests, and administer test protocols properly and safely. So why would we, some of the reasons that we would test in strength conditioning, assess the athletic talent. Testing helps those athletes and coaches assess athletic talent, physical abilities. Hence, why do you think that we have the NFL Combine? Or why do you think we have the NFL Combine and stuff like that? We could just watch tape, right? Well, some of those tests that we perform at combines, whether it be for the NBA, NFL, anything, they have reasons for doing it to see more along the lines of someone's athletic talent and how we would progress them. Or why do you think you do preseason train or testing and maybe test at certain points during the off season, stuff like that? It's to make sure that we are progressing you in a manner, or that you're reaching to certain areas within your sports athletic abilities that put you at the top, or at least to say that what we are doing is actually helping and actually doing what we want it to do. Okay. It allows for coaches to set specific goals. If we were to sit there and not test, if y'all as a class were my team and we went and tested certain items, I could sit there and tell, this group of people over here, we're really going to be concentrating on building your strength. Okay. You're already fast enough. We need to build your strength. These individuals over here, they're pretty strong, but they're not fast. So let's work on their speed, right? So you have to make sure that you do it. And it's not something that you can just overall put across the board for everything. Now, you may have certain aspects that you're teaching or that you're coaching it within your team or whatever it might be, where you're like, as a team, we need to get stronger. Okay, that's given. We can do that. We need to test for it to make sure that we're actually getting stronger as a team. But you can also use this to break it down into individual aspects as well. And you can also, some of the testing that we do does determine whether or not someone has a physical capability or the abilities with technique and practice to actually be a competitive player. Someone may have the heart to do something. I mean, we see that in sports all the time, but you're just not fast enough. You just can't jump high enough, right? But if you look at some of the athletes that we have in sports or throughout sports history, if you looked at some people and said, oh, well, they're automatically not going to be able to make it to the NBA, they're too short. Well, Muggsy Bogues, Spud Webb, and a few others would beg to differ, considering that I believe Spud Webb won the dunk contest and he's like under 6 foot. Yeah, his jumping ability and his basketball ability was good enough. So if you judged him just off of his height, you would have been wrong and he would have never played in the NBA. Okay, so there's a reasons for doing testing without just giving people the eye test, so to speak. Identifying the physical abilities in need of improvement, like I just kind of talked about. Are you kind of slow, but you're really strong? Okay, we need to work on your speed. So we can start targeting a prescribed exercise program, especially if you're in a program where you're working with an individual one-on-one. That's really when the testing needs to be very inclusive and very comprehensive. Okay, if you're doing it as a team kind of thing and it's more of a team goal, that testing can be a little bit watered down, so to speak. Not as many tests, or they become more and more just basic exams or testing procedures. Helps you set the goals. We need to be faster in 6 weeks. We need to be stronger 6 weeks, whatever it might be. And the tests that we use on day one need to be the same test that we use either at the midway point, the end point, 2 years down the road, whatever it might be. You need to use the exact same tests. Why? Well, okay, what if we've been working on my bench press, but you're not looking at anything bench press related? Everything that we've been doing might not be geared towards what the actual exam was, right? Or maybe you're testing bench press and we haven't worked on bench press at all, okay? So making sure that things match up and line up pretty hand in hand. So some of the key terms: a test, okay, it's a procedure for assessing ability in a particular endeavor. All right, same thing with a written test. Can you perform what that subject or that portion of the subject matter is, right? 40-yard dash, it's a test. The difference between a lab test and a field test. A field test is going to be a test used to assess ability that is performed away from the laboratory. It does not require extensive training or expensive equipment. Now, the training would be more along the lines of on the person doing the exam, all right? If I told you to go in and use the metabolic cart and all that within our lab upstairs at the university, that requires a little bit of training, okay? You can't, and we can't really move that. So we can't move it outside, and it's not really a portable type machine. It needs to be on a treadmill. So doing something like that is going to require you to have a laboratory base. But field tests, on the other hand, it may be something where we use the 1.5 mile run test to try to find someone's estimated VO2. Okay, that's just requires you to have a track or at least a distance of 1.5 miles and a stopwatch and the ability to read someone's heart rate. Okay, so that type of stuff is a field test, stuff that doesn't require a lot of material, right? You can do it anywhere you want, and it's very, very portable in a sense. The measurement is the process of collecting the test data. Okay, so if we're testing the bench press is the test, and all the reps and everything else, that's the measurement that we're doing, okay? The evaluation, the process of analyzing test results for the purpose of making decisions. That evaluation is making sure that, okay, if I'm evaluating you and we started 6 weeks ago and we're on a 12-week program, this is going to kind of hit both the evaluation and the mid test, okay? That 6-week mark, that's my mid test. It's a midway point. You can have more than one mid test. You could go every 4 weeks if you wanted to. It's up to you. Basically, a mid test is anything that's between beginning and end. But that evaluation is taking what we find at that testing session, whether it's the beginning, the middle, or the end, and evaluating. Do we need to make adjustments to become stronger? Have we been becoming stronger? Did we become stronger? Those are all the evaluations, okay? A formative evaluation is periodic reevaluation based on mid-tests administered during training. Again, usually at regular intervals. Post-test, that's the very end. If you have a 12-week program, whatever you're testing at week 12, that's your post-test. All right, so it means like this is what all of we've done for the previous portion has led us to this point. What did we get? Okay. Validity. So it's the degree to which a test or a test item measures what it is supposed to measure. one of the most important characteristics of testing. If I'm trying to test strength, I need to make sure that my test is a valid test of strength, right? You don't just pull something out of the air because you think it sounds cool to say, we're going to look at, how many whatevers of an exercise, right? You saw it was something really cool, or this athlete did it. Okay, it might have been cool and it might be something we can look at, but it might not be a valid measure to be actually assessing that individual or that athlete's strength or endurance or speed, whatever it might be. You just need to make sure that whatever it is that you're testing is actually measuring what it needs to measure, okay? Hence why we have certain things, while I may disagree with some of the things with the NFL Combine, and I would typically go on a long rant about now and in class about it, but for the most part, a lot of the stuff what they do, technically they're a valid test. The 40-yard dash is a valid test for speed. The bench press is a valid test for strength. Now, the way the NFL does it, when you put it 225 pounds on the bar for everybody, no matter if you're 6 foot, 160 pounds versus 6'8", 330 pounds, and you just look at how many repetitions you're going to do as a whole, it's more of an endurance test, especially if you get up there and you're doing like 30 plus reps. That's endurance. But if someone gets up there and can only do 2 or 3, technically it's a strength test for them. Okay, so just making sure that what you're doing actually goes into what you're trying to evaluate. Constructive validity. It's the ability of a test to represent the underlying construct or the theory developed to organize and explain some aspects of existing knowledge and observations. Once again, it just needs to make sure that what you're doing is actually gearing towards actually measuring what you're trying to measure. Face validity, the appearance to the athlete and other casual observers that the test measures what it is purported to measure. In other words, does the athlete, without getting too in depth with him, remember I keep telling you, the more information you start giving a lot of people, they tune you out, right? Simpler the better. So if I sat there and I told you, hey, we're working and we're going to test your 40-yard dash. Well, the athlete thinks, okay, yep, that's a good measure of speed. Mom and dad up in the stands, oh yeah, that's a good measure of speed. Well, that's face validity. It's measuring what they think it's going to measure, okay? Content validity, the assessment by experts that the test covers all relevant subtopics or component abilities in appropriate proportions. Once again, it just needs to make sure that we have everything is being measured that we expect to be measured, and it's measuring in the proper way. Criterion reference, the extent to which a test scores are associated with some other measure of the same ability. It might be something where, if we start looking at things such as the ACSM guidelines, I believe it's, making sure that we hit a certain criteria reference for that validity, right? I think it's for you to have good upper body strength. According to ACSM, last time I checked, it was you have to be able to chest press or bench press 120% of your body weight. So if you're 100 pounds, you need to be able to bench press 120 pounds. And then for lower body, it was somewhere right around 200 times or 2 times your body weight. Sorry, not 200 times, 200%. So if you're 100 pounds, you need to leg press 200 pounds. Okay. So there's that. Concurrent validity, the extent to which test scores are associated with those of other accepted tests measuring the same ability. Sometimes this is where more of this type of stuff, the concurrent, the current validity, all that type of stuff, the criterion reference, we start looking more at that aspect if it's something along the lines of, I'm trying to determine if this test follows the same validity measures as something we already have previously established, right? There's going to be some tests that we consider gold standards of everything, no matter what the type of assessment is that we're looking at. But we need to also, we can't always just stay in one spot. We try to look at different things to see if they carry the same weight, so to speak, in identifying the same problems or being able to evaluate certain things, because as we'll start talking, and I'll get more about this and you'll understand where I'm talking or what I'm trying to hint at here when we start getting into the test here in a couple of slides, because I have some good examples of why you would think, or why we need to understand the validity, and why we try to do this type of stuff with different methods and different exercises all the time. Predictive validity is the extent to which the test score corresponds with future performance or behavior. So in other words, what we're doing now, does it have a predictive validity that down the road, is it still going to be a valid test to measure what we're looking at measuring? Discriminant validity, the ability of a test to distinguish between two different constructs. Again, just is it distinguishing what we need it to distinguish, or is it just falling in line with everything else? Reliability. Now, I know there's a lot of all this stuff about all the different validities, but really and truly, as long as you understand reliability and validity, you should understand, and it'll be a good foundation for everything else, and you should understand everything that's going to be coming your way. The reliability is a measure of the degree of consistency or repeatability of a test. Okay, so a test can be valid, meaning that it does measure strength, but is it reliable? Can I repeat the measure each and every time? Can I repeat it? Reliability of a test may differ between groups based on differences in physical or emotional maturity and skill level. So some tests may not be that's very reliable in youth, but once we get into adults or 18 and over, it may be very reliable. Okay, so it doesn't mean that its validity changed, but its reliability may have changed. A test must be reliable for it to be valid, because highly variable results have little meaning. Meaning that if it's not reliable, meaning kind of, if I tested somebody today, or you test me today, and what I do, and I'll just use this exercise as an example. If you test me on the bench press, and today it's 200 pounds is what we get, and then tomorrow we get 250 pounds. Well, did I gain 50 pounds of strength overnight? No. Odds are something happened to where your reliability of the test was off, right? Because then if I come back in 2 days and I only get 175, well, what is it? Is the real number 200? Is it 250? Is it 175? That's not to say that your reliability of a test changes if we're looking weeks down the road. Because if I test and I get 200 pounds on the bench press in week 1, or from our baseline, and then I go 12 weeks and and the training is actually really good, and I get 250 pounds on my bench press at week 12, it's still reliable, because the stuff that we did within those 12 weeks hopefully was geared towards that gain of 50 pounds. But a day-to-day reliability, that's not good. Okay. Measurement error can arise from any of the following: inter-subjects. So within your subjects, you could have a big group of, so essentially if we were looking at something and we wanted to test the same exercise, excuse me, let's just say we took bench press. Again, it's an easy one and everybody understands what it is. But what if we took all of you in the class, grouped you in with a set of bodybuilders, as well as a set of strongman competitors? Well, that's not going to be very reliable, because there's a lot of variability between you as a group of students, the bodybuilders, and the strongman competitors. But when we group you all together, that's a lot of variability within the subject groups. Okay, lack of inter-rater reliability. That's going to be if we sit there. Let's take the 40-yard dash for an example. Nowadays, it's not too bad, because we do have the ability to do more laser timers and stuff like that. So as soon as somebody breaks the beam on one end, the timer starts. And as soon as they break it at the end of 40 seconds, or the 40 meters or 40 yards, it stops the clock. That's should be the same each and every time. But let's take it back a few years and let's go old school. Let's just say we are using just a stopwatch in our eyes to see when somebody moves for the first time and when they cross the finish line. Well, first off, if I'm 40 yards downfield, I may be a little late to seeing when they move, right? Or when they actually cross the line, or wherever it might be. My standing position may change. That's one thing, but if that's how we're going to do it, I need to do that for every single person, and I need to be the person that times it every time. Okay, if that's the case, then I have my own keys that I'm working on, okay? But let's just say I'm the person that typically does the 40s, and I'm just going to start calling people names and using students as examples here. And then all of a sudden, I'm out today, but we have 5 people that are running the 40, and Blessing has to be the timer. Well, she's never watched them. She's never done the timing for 40. You think there's going to be a little bit of a difference between their times? More than likely, yeah. That's our inter-rater reliability, okay? And then the failure of the test itself to provide consistent results. Once again, if it's something that's not giving us consistent results that are in line with each other, that could be a potential reliability problem within the exam itself. So that kind of just talks a little bit about some of the definitions that I did kind of talk about just now. All right, a little bit more of a definition based on them. So let's talk about test selection. Metabolic energy system specificity. So again, I think I've talked a little bit about it. And again, this is kind of some of those things where my ex-phys class may be a little bit more on my mind, but consider the energy demands of the sport when choosing or designing tests. Again, if I'm talking about Usain Bolt, who runs the 100 meters and the 200 meter dashes in the Olympics, am I going to test his 1 mile run? It shouldn't. It doesn't matter. He doesn't do that. Or if I'm testing a marathon runner, I don't need to be testing their 40-yard dash, right? Or if that is something that you're putting into the testing just to have it for your knowledge base, that's fine, but it does not need to be the portion that your overall programming relies upon, if that makes sense. Biomechanical movement pattern specificity. The more similar a test is to what the athlete does or will be doing, the better the test is. So I just told you how we're trying to find new things. Look up a Zercher squat, Zercher. Essentially, it's the squat where if I'm up, the bar lays across my arms, you know, not like a front squat, but more right here. I know people that use that for testing firefighters. Why? Because typically if you're carrying somebody or in their line of work, that movement of putting their arms out like that and holding somebody's weight or the weight of something in that manner is very biomechanically specific to their job. Or the type of deadlift that they might choose is more of a sumo deadlift where your hands are closer together. Well, again, if you're having to pick somebody up off the ground, that makes more sense than just your typical deadlift. Or a floor press. Again, if they're a firefighter and something happens and they fall, typically they fall on a floor and something lands on them. They don't have the full ability where, like a bench, to let the arms and everything go way down here. So they need to be strong from here up, right? So understanding how something specifically relates to somebody's job or sport, okay, because strength conditioning is not just sports. It can be occupational strength conditioning as well, okay? Talked about that. Experience and training status. Consider the athlete's ability to perform the technique. So, like I said, if I took you in the class as a class today, And I said, okay, we're going to be testing your strength on the Olympic lifts of a clean and jerk, a snatch, and all that. You don't have the technique. Some of you might, most of you don't. So those results are going to be, for one, they're not going to be very good. Two, likelihood of me injuring somebody with that is very high as well. Okay, so you got to understand that maybe you have to go through also a little bit of a training period to allow for that person to understand what it's going to feel like, so that way on test day it's not all coming at them all at once. All right. Consider the athlete's level of strength and endurance training. Let's take it from this aspect. A freshman in high school entering football versus a senior in high school leaving football versus a end of the year freshman year football player, into their college career football player, and an NFL player. You think the levels of strength and endurance are going to be a lot different? Well, yeah, first of all, one of them's been training for many more years than the other one has. One of them's fully grown. The other one's not. You know, we talked about this when we talked about age and sex. You got to make sure that somebody might not be ready for what they're doing. Okay. Age and sex both may affect an athlete's experience, interest, or the ability. I mean, if you take a 5-year-old and you go put them out on the baseball field, if they want to go pick flowers today or whatever it might be, are you going to automatically assume that, oh, they'll never be an MLB baseball player because they didn't want to do it at the age of 5? I'm going to tell you right now, the people that are like gung-ho like that, like the Rory McIlroys of golf or the Tiger Woods, they're few and far between. Some people just play sports and then finally at a certain age, they find one that's their best one and they stick with it. Okay, so making sure that you understand, or maybe are they interested? If you're testing kids, likelihood they're probably a little bit behind to that of a parent who told them that's what they're playing this year. They might not be ready to do it or want to do it. Okay, so take that into account. Environmental factors. So I get that if you're doing a 12-week program, depending upon when you start, weather may be vastly different. I get that. You may test right now in early March, and 12 weeks down the road, we're hitting close to near July. So think about testing somebody outside in South Texas. It's a little hotter in July than it is right now. So understanding how those can impair performances, pose health risks, and lower some of the validity of some endurance tests that we have. Temperature fluctuations can reduce the ability to compare test results over time. Again, if I went and I tested you in September, 12 weeks is right around December-ish or late November. Depending upon where you're at, it could have been nice, comfortable outside, and now we are near snow outside in December. You think I'm going to perform a little differently? Yeah, I would say so. So trying to mimic the environment as much as possible. So have an understanding that it may fluctuate some of your results if you are doing outdoor exams, and the time differences and the seasonal differences are vastly different. But if you can and you are, make sure that you do everything the same. Make sure it's at the same time of the day. All right. So if we're testing every week at the end of the week and it's summer, all right, I want it to be as cool as it can be. Well, likelihood I need to start my exams, 6, 7 in the morning. Okay. Well, every time that we test, we need to try to be at 6 or 7, whatever that hour or time might be. All right. That way we can mimic as much as possible. So how do we administer health and safety considerations? Be aware of testing conditions that can threaten the health of athletes. High heat, high humidity, right? That changes our sweat rates, our core temperatures vastly. Be observant of signs and symptoms of health problems. So essentially, if you come in, make sure that you do a health questionnaire beforehand. If you have an elderly person, likelihood is we need to stay with machines. Don't do free weights, or we're not going to be having them do the Valsalva maneuver, right? Or we're going to give them a little bit more time in between exams. Be observant of the health status of athletes before, during, and after maximal exertions. One, you want to make sure, because most athletes' mentality is to just push through it, which, okay, that's fine on certain things, but on testing, when we're putting the body typically to its maximal point, we don't need that. That could lead into big injuries. Or if they're nursing an injury, maybe we need to push testing back to allow them to be at full health, because we don't want to push them and injure them. And then what happens then? They're out for a lot longer for competition. Okay. Testing administration is some of it is very common sense related. Other aspects of test administration are a little bit more of an art form than a science, and it takes you doing a lot of them to be comfortable with it and performing them properly. Aerobic endurance testing in the heat. During the weeks before the test, athletes should engage in enough training to establish a baseline of fitness in the activity being tested. So maybe allowing the athletes to know what's coming their way. So, hey guys, start doing this outside. Get acclimated to that heat and understanding how you're going to be feeling. That way, test day is not the first day that you stepped outside all summer. Avoid testing under extreme conditions of heat and humidity. I know we've all done it, and sometimes you cannot avoid it. I mean, how long are you willing to push it back if you're testing somebody in South Texas and you have to do something outside? Because June through September, we're hitting the triple digits most of the time. You can't postpone something for 4 months, right? So you got to be cognizant of what's happening and just be prepared. Maybe not so many tests, if that makes sense. On days when the temperature is high, indoor facilities should be used. I will say this: if we're talking about certain aspects of possibly practice and stuff like that, I would agree. If you're talking about testing and you have the ability of an indoor facility at the very beginning, might as well just do everything in the indoor, because then no matter what the temperature is outside, you can test them indoors, and your environmental aspect is the same each and every time. Athletes should be acclimatized to the heat and humidity. Athletes should make sure they're well hydrated. All this kind of is, like I said, common sense. Athletes should be encouraged to drink during exercise in the heat. Athletes should wear a light-colored, loose-fitting tank top and shorts, preferably of a mesh material. I mean, essentially nowadays, especially, just making sure that the clothing is appropriate for the time of year. There's no sense needed in wearing sweatpants in the summer to go do a test. Now, I know we might see athletes doing that. Yeah, they're probably trying to, for one, keep a little bit of sun, or they're probably trying to shed a little bit of weight for monetary bonuses. Look for symptoms of heat stroke and heat exhaustion: cramps, nausea, dizziness, difficulty walking or standing, faintness, garbled speech, lack of sweat, red or ashen skin, goosebumps. Now, again, not all these are pure indicators of heat stroke or heat exhaustion. You know, if you're cramping, okay, that could just be that you're cramping from the exam. If you're nauseous, did they eat right before? What did they eat, right? Some of this needs to be understanding that some of these come together versus separately. Be aware of the symptoms of hyponatremia or water intoxication. Extremely dilute urine, especially if we've been exercising in the heat. Their urine should typically be a little darker for dehydration. If it's coming out after practice and everything is completely diluted or very clearish, we might have a problem. Bloated skin, altered consciousness, loss of consciousness, no increase in the body temperature. And then proficient medical coverage should be readily available. Obviously, some of the stuff on these slides, especially when we're getting into this last unit, really start to deal more along the lines of at a college level or a very high level of athletics. And so you got to take it into account. Basically, just be ready and make sure that medical coverage is readily available to you. 911 off your phone, right? If you're in a smaller rural area doing types of stuff. Selection and training of testers. So provide testers with practice and training. So basically, here's what the whole issue of this is, and ensure that there's consistency among the testers. If it's something where we are doing just one day of testing all day, and maybe it's our only day of testing, okay, maybe what we need to do is assign somebody a certain section and let them just do that test all day. Like I said, maybe it's Blessing doing 40s. We're going to put Shelby in charge of vertical jumps. We're going to put Nick in charge of broad jump, right? We're going to put Lorenzo in charge of the bench press. So all day you're doing that. Y'all are doing those tests for every athlete that comes through. Why? Because I know that whatever Shelby looks at for the vertical jump each and every time, she's going to look at it for each and every athlete instead of me switching it up all the time and maybe Blessing looks for something else or Nick looks for something else. But if we're doing multiple days of testing or there's multiple time periods, then what might be better is that we train each and every one of you for each section. That way everybody's looking and doing the exact same thing. So if it needs to be that Lorenzo's over on the 40s and now Nick is over at the vertical jump and Shelby has to do the bench press and whatnot, then I know that at least now I know that everybody should be looking at the same thing and judging the same thing for what completes a true test. Okay. Recording forms. Prepare scoring forms ahead of time to increase the efficiency and reduce recording errors. It doesn't sound like a lot, but if you did something and you didn't have your sheet right next to you, are you going to try to remember what all three values were for the three tests and then write them down? Or would it just be easier to write it down right when they perform the exam? It's going to be easier to write it down right when they perform the exam. Test format. Consider whether athletes will be tested all at once or in groups, first of all. The same tester should administer a given test to all the athletes if possible. So when we start talking about that, it would be most beneficial if in that first scenario I gave you, Shelby does all the vertical jumps each and every time. But sometimes that doesn't work out that way. Each tester should administer one test at a time, meaning do not try to sit there and do 2 bench presses at once or anything else, because what can happen is competitiveness will get in line, okay? And someone overextends themselves trying to be competitive with someone else, or someone's time or results are messed up because you're trying to do 2 at once. Testing batteries. Duplicate. Test setups can be used for large groups. So in other words, you can have multiple sections doing the exact same thing. That's fine. But if you have that, then one group, you need to section them off, and they all need to go to that same person each and every time. Allowing 2 minutes of rest between attempts that are not close to the athlete's maximum, 3 minutes between attempts that are close, and 5 minutes between test batteries. So if we're going from bench press to squat, I need to give you 5 minutes between that last bench press that you did and when you do the first squat. All right, you want to try to keep the athlete as fresh as possible. Sequence of tests. Do your non-fatiguing tests first. So ease your exams first. Maybe it's all paperwork or cognitive stuff. Agility tests go next. Why? Because we don't need to be at our fullest yet, okay? Agility is a little bit more controlled. Maximum power and strength tests need to go next. Sprint tests, then local muscular endurance tests, fatiguing and anaerobic capacity tests, and then aerobic capacity tests. Why? Because typically the order that we just went in, well, yes, I understand maximum power and strength are pretty taxing. In regards to everything else, that goes from non-taxing to most taxing in terms of test selection. So making sure that you do easy, 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 medium, 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 hard, 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 hardest. Build them up to that. That way, by the time they get to the hardest, they aren't completely fatigued, or by the time they get to something that should be non-fatiguing in a sense, but still pretty valid. If I've been put through the ringer of an aerobic capacity and I've ran a mile, I've done maximum squat and bench press, I don't really care what I do on this last little bit, right? So you want to make sure that you get the best out of them for each and everything that you're going to do. So going from non-fatiguing to most fatiguing is the best route for test selection. Administration. Preparing the athletes for the testing. Announce the date, the time, and the purpose of the test in advance. Why? So that they're prepared, in a sense, okay? Host a pre-test practice session. That's going to help them a couple different ways. If it's using a test that they've not really been clear about yet, they at least get to see it ahead of time so they are mentally prepared the next time they come in for the full test. Provide clear and simple instructions. Don't overcomplicate things, okay? Yeah, the test may be doing all of this, but all they need to know is, hey, I need you to pedal as fast as you can until I tell you to stop. All right, done. Demonstrate the proper test performance. So be able to sit there and tell them or show them what the proper bench press is, what the proper squat, etc. Organize a pre-test warm-up. So let them warm up a little bit before the actual test begins. Tell athletes their scores after each trial. You could tell them that, and some of the tests that you may do, they may say, okay, because they don't know what you're saying. Or at least they can sit there and say, that might not have been my best performance, especially if it's something that they know about, and then they can adjust accordingly for your next trial. And administer a supervised cool down. In other words, don't put them through a whole lot of tests and say, see ya, and you walk away. Because sometimes people don't have a problem until a few minutes later, and then it all hits them. So giving them about a 15-minute time period where they cool down, and then you observe them, is always going to be the best bet for you. That's chapter 12. This video may be long, and I apologize for that. Typically, from here on out, I'll try to separate videos. I just know that with testing, it's kind of hard to cut that chapter at a certain point, so I'd rather just go all in on it right now. With that being said, I'll be uploading the other videos here shortly or within the coming days, little by little, and I will notify you of those uploads. All right? Have a good day, guys.